On the West Coast, 3 o'clock at the White House, where President Trump met with the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell. And after blasting that lawmaker for failing on health care, the president now showing some love.
We're probably now, I think, at least as far as I'm concerned, closer than ever before. And the relationship is very good. We're fighting for the same thing.
But can the two men work together on their agenda, including tax cuts? High stakes there, as Senator Lindsey Graham says if Republicans fail, quote, we're dead. A big day in the bribery trial of a sitting Democratic senator as the judge declines to throw out part of the corruption case against the New Jersey's Bob Menendez. A lot of eyes on this because if he's convicted, he loses his seat and the Republican governor would choose his replacement. Plus, have your pets ever eaten anything they should not have? Of course they have. Ahead, some of the strangest x-rays that veterinarians have seen. We'll show you. Let's get to it.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And good afternoon from the Fox News deck. What a surprise that was. A last-minute announcement, and the regular press briefing became a Rose Garden event, a full-on press conference. President Trump and the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell together and answering questions in the last hour. Despite recent tensions between the president and Senator McConnell, they both told reporters they're good friends and are fighting for the same things.
We've been friends for a long time. We are probably now, despite what we read, we're probably now, I think, at least as far as I'm concerned, closer than ever before.
We have the same agenda. We've been friends and acquaintances for a long time. We talk frequently. We don't give you a readout every time we have a conversation, but frequently we talk on the weekends about the issues that are before us.
President Trump and Senator McConnell speaking after they had lunch at the White House. Republicans are still looking for their first major legislative win. President Trump has personally blamed Leader McConnell for failing to deliver on health care, saying he's very disappointed in Mitch. The president has also worked with Democrats to cut a deal on raising the U.S. borrowing limit. Leader McConnell has accused the president of having excessive expectations. He pointed to the democratic process, saying that's the way it is in our country. Today, both the president and Leader McConnell insisted they have the same agenda, and yet earlier today, before their lunch meeting, the president said he understands fully why his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, is campaigning against Leader McConnell and other GOP leaders.
I know how he feels. It depends on who you're talking about. There are some Republicans, frankly, that should be ashamed of themselves, but most of them, I'll tell you what, I know the Republican senators, most of them are really, really great people that want to work hard and they want to do a great thing for the American public. But you had a few people that really disappointed us. They really, really disappointed us. So I can understand fully how Steve Bannon feels.
And the president said he will not and does not blame himself. But he later said he might try to talk Steve Bannon out of going after some of the GOP senators. Despite the president's comments, Leader McConnell said he will always support whoever the incumbent Republican senator happens to be.
Our operating approach will be to support our incumbents and in open seats to seek to help nominate people who can actually win in November. That's my approach. That's the way you keep a governing majority.
Here's the backstory. Over the weekend, Steve Bannon said he's declaring war against the GOP's establishment. He says he's working to mount primary challenges within the Republican Party against Republicans who've butted heads with President Trump. Every Republican, he says, except Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Bannon left the White House in August and returned to his alt-right website, Breitbart. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts live on the North Lawn this afternoon. That was quite a thing, very unexpected.
It's one of the reasons, Shep, why I never even leave this place during the day to go get a cup of coffee, because you really never know what's going to happen. We were all sitting there waiting for the briefing. I had an inkling that something was going to happen out in the Rose Garden, but we didn't know it was going to turn into a full-on press conference. But there was the president, together with Mitch McConnell, who couldn't go anywhere while the president was answering all these questions, and the president brought him in from time to time. And really, it was sort of what we have seen in the last couple of weeks. Remember when Rex Tillerson came out to address the media to say, hey, everything is good here. I'm not thinking of leaving. And then Chief of Staff John Kelly came out last week to say, I'm not going to be fired and I'm not planning to leave my job. Well, there we saw the president come out with Mitch McConnell to say, hey, despite what you've heard and despite what we've tweeted at each other, everything is okay. Listen here.
My relationship with this gentleman is outstanding, has been outstanding. We are working very hard to get the tax cuts. We will continue to work hard to get the health care completed. I'm going to be surprising some people with an economic development bill later on, but I haven't even told Mitch because I want to focus on tax cuts and some other things right now.
So there you have the two of them standing side by side there in the Rose Garden, which is a very prestigious location, we should say, to tell the media that everything is okay in the relationship between them. But still, it doesn't stop the rumblings, Shep, among some people in the Republican Party, that Mitch McConnell should no longer be the Senate Majority Leader, that he should hand over the reins to somebody else because he hasn't been able to get through a couple of the president's big legislative requirements. Jason Chaffetz, who was a former member of the House and now a Fox News contributor, said this morning, I don't see any reason for him to continue on as the leader. But there you had the president saying he's even going to go to talk to Steve Bannon to get him to reconsider some of the people that he's fighting against here on the establishment side of the Republican Party. Shep?
And John, you asked the president about his tax plan today.
Yeah, because there's a little bit of a disconnect that's been going on when we talk about tax reform. The president said he wants to get it done this year. Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, has said that he would keep the House in session even through the Christmas break in order to get it done by the end of the year. But then Mitch McConnell has been kind of the lone voice in the leadership saying, we'll get it done this Congress, which means that he would have until January of 2019 to get it done. So I asked the president if he would be okay if tax reform didn't get done by the end of this year and maybe played out until next year. Let's listen to what the president said.
I would like to see it be done this year, John. I would like very much to see it be done this year. So we won't go a step further. If we get it done, that's a great achievement. But don't forget, it took years for the Reagan administration to get taxes done. I've been here for 9 months. I really believe that we have a very good chance, and I think Mitch feels the same way, of getting the taxes done, hopefully fairly long before the end of the year.
And Mitch McConnell stepped up to the microphone right after that to say the goal is to get it done this year, which is new, Shep, because he hasn't said that before.
John Roberts at the White House. And John, then there's health care. President Trump says Republicans will try again to pass a health care bill next year and that he's confident they'll have the votes. In fact, he says they have the votes now, or they probably do. But they don't, or they take the vote. They did not have the votes when the Senate tried to pass a bill. More on that in a moment. Earlier today, the president said there is no such thing as Obamacare anymore. Also not true. He even suggested reporters should stop writing about the Affordable Care Act.
Obamacare is finished. It's dead. It's gone. It's no longer, you shouldn't even mention, it's gone. There is no such thing as Obamacare anymore. It is and I said this years ago, it's a concept that couldn't have worked.
Well, it is actually still the law of the land. It has not been repealed. Last week, the president made two major moves to roll back parts of the health care law, though. He ended subsidy payments to insurance companies. Those are the payments that were designed to keep costs lower for lower income people, so they'll now pay more. He also signed an executive order to make cheaper plans more available, in many cases plans that don't always cover the illnesses with which people are inflicted. Critics say those moves will raise costs for millions and millions of Americans. Democrats have accused the president of sabotaging health care. Back to John Roberts at the White House. They don't have the votes, do they?
They don't have them at the moment, even though the president says that they do, but they think that there's a few things that they can accomplish over the course of the next 3, maybe 4 months that could bring on board people like Senator John McCain, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and maybe even Rand Paul. And the president's legislative director, Mark Short, was talking about that part of it earlier today, speaking with Harris Faulkner, when he said that part of the problem with people like McCain and Murkowski is the process. They feel like there needs to be hearings on Capitol Hill, that all of this needs a bigger airing before they sign on to it. So they're planning on doing something along those lines. But if the president hopes to get Rand Paul on board, he's got to drop talk, as he repeated again today, about block grants to states, because Rand Paul doesn't like that. So I don't know how they're going to adjust the formula to get Paul on board, but they're definitely trying, which includes taking him out to play golf rather often. But again in today the president with no apology for cutting one of those cost-sharing reductions, otherwise known as the subsidies to insurance companies. Listen here.
Insurance companies have made a fortune with Obamacare, an absolute fortune. As you know, what I did with the cuts at the end, which were all going, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a month going right into the pockets of the insurance companies. And I'm very happy with what I did. A priority of mine, and you know that this is coming up, will be the cost of prescription drugs. We're going to get the costs way down.
And something else the president is going to do next week. This was a big piece of news that he announced this afternoon. He was actually kind of pressed into it because he had alluded to it and then went into more specificity upon a further question. And that is next week the president will declare a national drug emergency, or national emergency rather, when it comes to the problem of opioid abuse and opioid deaths in the United States. He said it's a big issue that they've been wrestling with. They've got to figure out how to do it. They've just about got the policy in place, Shep, so we'll hear about that next week.
All right, John Roberts on a beautiful day at the White House. Thank you, John. Let's turn to reporter Rachel Baier, who covers Congress for Politico. Rachel, good to see you again.
Hey, how are you?
Tax cuts. It's not clear yet what they are, because they've laid out what the tax brackets would be, but they haven't said who and which income level will fall into each bracket. So I don't know how you even score this. Much talk about what effect it's going to have.
Well, I think there are a lot of details that have yet to be finalized in Congress about what that tax bill is going to look like. I think the first thing they wanted to do, which you saw today, was they wanted to get the president and Republican Congress on the same page. We're hearing a lot of stories about, Bannon going after Senate Republicans, a lot of GOP infighting. We saw conservatives write a letter to Mitch McConnell last week and say, we want you to step down. There's a lot of infighting going on right now. In tax reform, it's hard enough if you're fighting, it's going to be even more impossible. So right now, my Republican sources say they want to make sure they're on the same page with the president. They want basically optics. They want the president out there with GOP leadership, and that's what you saw today. So I think this was the first step they were going to take to try to show some unity. I am willing to bet that in private, that conversation between Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and President Trump that you just talked about was a little more frank than we saw publicly. But this is surely a first step, and tax reform, they've got some work to do.
The Bannon wing of things, though, make no mistake, Mitch McConnell and President Trump can say they're Leader McConnell and President Trump can say they're close as much as they want. But there is no doubting that Steve Bannon and his wing of the party is coming after Mitch McConnell and the leader in the House and every other Republican senator. We know this because he's told us. He's coming after them. He wants to primary them. How are they going to resolve this matter?
I think it's going to be a bloody civil war. The next midterm election, you're going to see the establishment versus Trump populist candidates. And, it could be an ugly fight. I think today you saw the president come out and he said he's going to talk to Steve Bannon, his good friend Steve Bannon, try to change his mind about supporting some of these primary challengers against Senate Republicans. You saw Mitch McConnell actually go out and defend himself and defend Senate Republicans, saying that, the people that Steve Bannon wants to prop up and the people that some of these more fringe groups want to put on the ballot, these folks can't get elected in the general election. So McConnell made this case at the press conference that, we saw Sharon Angle type candidates before, Todd Aiken type candidates, and they were too far right wing to actually get elected. So he was trying to make the case that the candidates they have now are the best candidates moving forward. However, Roy Moore, as you saw just a couple of weeks ago, totally upended Mitch McConnell's and President Trump's plan on that regard. So it's surely going to be a brutal fight within the Republican Party, and it's not going to end anytime soon.
Rachel, almost out of time, but the president says there is no more Obamacare. There is. It's still the law of the land. He says they have the votes to pass repeal and replace. They do not. And he tells reporters not to write about Obamacare anymore because it doesn't exist. What are your sources saying about what this deceptive line is all about?
Basically, he's trying to change the narrative here, right? We're going to see a lot of stories about low-income folks losing health insurance because he stopped the subsidy payments. And I think right now Republicans are a little concerned about that and that it's going to have a blowback on them. He would prefer to talk about a replacement as opposed to how it's affecting people right now.
Rachel Baier, who covers Congress. Great to see you, Rachel. Thank you.
Good to see you, too.
If Congress doesn't pass a tax overhaul, by the way, the Republican Party is dead. Those are the words from a Republican senator, and a prominent one. So can the GOP come together after the health care failure? That's coming up from the Fox News deck on this Monday afternoon. It's great to have you in. Republicans still searching for their first major legislative victory since the president took office. The GOP Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has set his sights on tax cuts. He says if Republicans do not make a move on that, we're dead.
If we don't cut taxes and we don't eventually repeal and replace Obamacare, then we're going to lose across the board in the House in 2018. And all of my colleagues running in primaries in 2018 will probably get beat. It will be the end of Mitch McConnell as we know it.
The Republican plan for tax cuts faces an important test this week. Senators need to pass a budget bill first, which would clear the way for their tax plan to pass in the Senate, even without Democratic support. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill. What about the challenges ahead, Mike?
Well, Shep, yeah, first they must do that budget, and a critical part of that will be the fact that that is critical to setting up tax reform. One issue making that more difficult this week is Mississippi Republican Senator Thad Cochran is not making the trip to Washington this week. Cochran has been under the weather, will continue his recuperation back home in Mississippi, and so bottom line, that means there will be 51 Senate Republicans in town this week and even less margin for error. Big picture, the focus is on tax reform.
I agree with the president. It's about both reduction and reform. It's been 30 years since this kind of effort was undertaken successfully, and we're going to succeed this time. The bills, the details of them, will be written by the Ways and Means and Finance committees after we approve the budget.
Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer is taking aim on Twitter, writing at POTUS, the president's handle, complains about fake news. This tax plan's fake math is as bad as any of the so-called fake news he has complained about. So the Democrats are suggesting this tax plan, when it is finalized, will be bad for the middle class. Shep.
And Senator Graham talking about the consequences of a failure on taxes. Is he overstating the matter, or is he on point?
No, we've heard other Republicans say essentially they realize that there are serious consequences if they fail, but they are focused on getting reference to not allowing that frustration to spill over to pick nominees who cannot win.
Winners make policy and losers go home. We changed the business model in 2014. We nominated people who could win everywhere. We took the majority in the Senate. We had one skirmish in 2016. We kept the majority in the Senate. So our operating approach will be to support our incumbents.
So after having lunch with the president, McConnell sounded a lot like the president there, talking winners and losers. Perhaps a reminder to the president in front of the TV cameras there about the consequences of perhaps nominating others to take on sitting Republican senators. Shep.
Mike Emanuel at the Rotunda on Capitol Hill. Thank you. Prosecutors say a man inspired by the Islamic State tried to murder people by planting bombs here in New York City. Now a jury has reached a decision on his fate, but it may not be the last word. Details ahead, plus a big setback for the Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, as a judge today refuses to toss out some of the charges against him despite his lawyer's pleas. And if the senator from New Jersey loses his corruption case, his party could lose his seat in the Senate. All the new details from New Jersey coming up next. Today, 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Pacific. Shannon Bream with the news for tomorrow. Tonight, 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific, 2 weeks from today. The man who planted bombs on the streets of New York City last year now facing a sentence of life in prison. A jury has convicted a 29-year-old named Ahmad Khan Ramini of charges related to his plot. Prosecutors say he set off a bomb in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood in September, wounding 30 people. He set up another a few blocks away. That one did not explode, and one in New Jersey, which did indeed blow up but didn't hurt anybody. They said he was inspired by terrorist propaganda. The man pleaded not guilty, and the defense is promising an appeal, but for now, sentencing is scheduled for January. A federal judge refusing to toss out any corruption charges against Senator Bob Menendez in a case that could end up handing that seat to the GOP. Prosecutors accused the Democratic senator from New Jersey of taking money, taking flights on a private jet, and a luxury hotel room stay, or a series of them, from a wealthy donor in exchange for political favors. The senator claims they were gifts from an old friend with no quid pro quo. If the jury finds Senator Menendez guilty, it would be up to the governor of that state to pick his replacement. And since the governor is a Republican, Chris Christie, that would likely cost the Democrats a seat in the U.S. Senate at a very pivotal time. Our David Lee Miller with the news. He's at the courthouse in Newark, New Jersey this afternoon. David Lee?
Shepard, indeed, the stakes were very high when Senator Menendez entered the federal courthouse in Newark behind me. Last week, the prosecution in this case rested, and today, before the judge, were motions from the defense calling for a complete acquittal. The main motion, based primarily on a 2016 Supreme Court decision that overturned the conviction of Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. That ruling more narrowly defined what constitutes bribery. Based on that ruling, a couple of other convictions have already been overturned. The defense tried to convince the judge that the prosecution was so weak that this case shouldn't even be considered by the jury. Menendez, who always refuses to discuss the case, briefly responded to the question of a possible acquittal as he entered the courthouse.
The judge could very well dismiss most of the charges today. Can you describe how you feel?
Well, from your lips to God's ears. At the end, though, there was not to be any divine intervention. The judge denied all motions for acquittal, and the case resumed this afternoon with the first witness for the defense. That was none other than the senator's own son, Robert Menendez, Jr. He testified that the man who allegedly bribed his father with free travel and campaign donations was only a very close friend. He tried to make the point through testimony, Shepard, that this was not a case of bribery, simply friendship. The prosecution, however, tried to poke holes in his testimony and showed at least one inconsistency, drawing on testimony that he gave a number of years ago on this case before a grand jury. So while today we heard from Robert Menendez, Jr., the big question still remains, will we hear from Robert Menendez, the senator, as this case continues? Shepard.
David Lee Miller, live, Newark, New Jersey. Thank you. President Trump today said the United States could entirely terminate the Iran nuclear deal. But according to the UN ambassador, that's not what the Trump administration actually wants. That's coming up right after bottom of the hour headlines from Leah Gabriel on Fox News Channel.
I'm Leah Gabriel with a Fox report and more of today's headlines. More than 300 people are dead and nearly 400 hurt in Somalia. Investigators say a truck bomb blew up on a busy street in the capital, Mogadishu, on Saturday. The Somali government is blaming the al-Qaeda-linked terror group al-Shabaab, but the militants have not taken responsibility. The Coast Guard searching for a missing oil rig worker after an explosion in Louisiana. It happened on Lake Pontchartrain near New Orleans. The blast hurt at least 7 people and was so powerful it rattled homes more than a mile away. Investigators say cleaning chemicals caught fire on the platform. 2 stars colliding and creating some fireworks in outer space. NASA made an animation of what it looked like. Astronomers estimate the collision actually happened about 130 million years ago, but our telescope's only seeing it now. It created debris that became gold and platinum. The news continues with Shep right after this.
Bottom of the hour, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, says the Trump administration wants to stay in the Iran nuclear deal as long as Congress makes it stronger.
Well, I think right now you're going to see us stay in the deal because what we hope is that we can improve the situation, and that's the goal. So I think right now we're in the deal to see how we can make it better, and that's the goal. It's not that we're getting out of the deal. We're just trying to make the situation better so that the American people feel safer.
That from Meet the Press yesterday. On Friday, President Trump refused to certify the deal, which lifted some sanctions on Iran, in exchange for limits on its nuclear program. Congress now has 60 days to decide whether to reimpose sanctions. The president says if lawmakers do not come up with a solution, he may terminate the deal. Kristen Fisher on the top story at the bottom of the hour, live at the State Department. Hello, Kristen.
Hey, Shep. Well, while the president says that Iran has violated the spirit of the agreement, 3 members of his cabinet say that technically Iran is still in compliance. Listen to how Secretary of State Rex Tillerson explained it just yesterday.
There have been a number of technical violations, but under the agreement, and this is part of the weaknesses and the flaws, Iran has a significant period of time to remedy those violations. And so they have remedied the violations, which then brings them back into technical compliance.
So Congress now has about 2 months to make this deal acceptable to the president and address a lot of his concerns. He's been concerned about Iran's support of groups like Hezbollah and Iran's ballistic missile program, or else President Trump is still threatening to pull out of the deal entirely. So if that were to happen, what would that mean for a potential deal in the future with perhaps North Korea? Well, the Trump administration insists that it simply gives them more leverage, but our European allies argue that this would simply create some, it would simply undercut the U.S. credibility for any future deal going forward, Shep.
Kristen, thanks. Secretary of State Tillerson says President Trump wants to keep working diplomatic angles with North Korea and not stop unless fighting breaks out. That's what he told CBS's Face the Nation yesterday.
He supports our diplomatic efforts. We're going to maintain those diplomatic efforts. As I have commented to others, our diplomatic efforts will continue until the first bomb is dropped.
The Secretary of State also said yesterday that President Trump is not looking to go to war with the country, but that he does have military preparations ready to go. A couple of weeks ago, the president tweeted that Tillerson was wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man. That's how he refers to the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. John Bussey is here. He's the associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. Where are we here with North Korea?
A lot's going on, and Tillerson is pretty much leading the charge on the diplomatic side of this. I mean, there's the good cop, bad cop. You know, there's the language from President Trump. There's Tillerson working a lot of bilateral relationships to put the squeeze on North Korea. And a lot's been going on in the last many months. Felicia Schwartz, Paul Sohn writing about this in the Wall Street Journal. 20 nations have either shut down businesses that North Korea has in their countries, expelled their ambassadors, required reflagging of ships that North Korea was falsely claiming were ships of that nation when in fact they were North Korean. A lot's been going on from big to small. Mexico, Peru, Spain, Kuwait, Italy, just on October 1, have expelled the ambassadors, saying that, look, you know, you're using your diplomatic pouches to bring contraband in, and you're generating businesses that are illegal from the standpoint of the United Nations, bringing money back to North Korea. Germany went so small as to shut down a hostel in Berlin that the U.S. identified was a place where people were sending money back to North Korea. So from big to small, lots has been happening, and Tillerson's been leading this charge.
When the president says, stop bothering with negotiations, only one thing's going to work, are there, as the president's detractors would say, mixed messages happening between Secretary Tillerson and the president?
All right, so you could say it's mixed messages, or you could say this puts a lot of pressure on our allies to actually step up and do something, because the alternative is possibly the U.S., you know, going to war with North Korea, which nobody wants, right? Including our intelligence services, which are saying to Tillerson and are saying to the president, this is good that more pressure is being put on the businesses that North Korea has overseas that are bringing money back to fund its nuclear program. But it's not going to work, because North Korea will never be forced to the disarmament table. They realize that nukes are all that is keeping them surviving. So they have been counseling Tillerson, they've been counseling the president that while this is good to pursue, it's probably not going to work. They're not going to get their objective, which is disarmament by North Korea peacefully.
If that's not going to work, then you have to come up with something else or take something less than disarmament.
Yes. And so there's a big silence when that point is made. What do you do? This is what every single administration for the last 10, 15 years has been faced with. Do you confront them militarily, or do you try to pressure China into being even more stringent on North Korea? Get even more nations to block off North Korea such that you starve their nuclear program.
John Bussey from the Wall Street Journal, thank you. The State Department clarifying comments from President Trump about sonic attacks that left American diplomats in Cuba with hearing loss and, frankly, brain damage. Here's what the president said today. Listen.
I do believe Cuba is responsible. I do believe that. And it's a very unusual attack, as you know, but I do believe Cuba is responsible.
Well, U.S. officials have not formally blamed the Cuban government, but a State Department official now tells Fox News the president's comments are consistent with the department's opinion. And I'm quoting now. What we have said is that Cuba, as a host country, is responsible for the safety of our personnel in that country, and that they can do more to answer questions we have yet to have answered or yet to be able to answer. The feds say the attacks have injured at least 22 U.S. government workers. The Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl pleading guilty to charges including desertion after he walked off his post in Afghanistan back in 2009. We're also learning from him about his time in Taliban hands. Bergdahl appeared before a military judge in Fort Bragg, North Carolina today and essentially said, "I'm guilty of it all." He could face life behind bars for deserting and then misbehaving in front of the enemy. His lawyers admit he did not have permission to leave, and some U.S. troops were seriously wounded while they searched for him. In an interview obtained by ABC News, the Army sergeant described how his captors kept him locked up.
It's a cage that was welded together. It's about 7 foot long by about 6 foot wide. And how long were you in that cage for? Second, third, fourth, and into the 5th year.
The Obama administration negotiated Bo Bergdahl's release as part of a prisoner exchange back in 2014. The Army sergeant admits his behavior was inexcusable, but that he was leaving because of problems with his commanding officers. Our national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin's at the Pentagon this hour. What else happened in court today, Jen?
Well, Shepard, Bergdahl was joined by 6 of his defense lawyers today, but military prosecutors say there was no plea bargain. So in essence, Bergdahl's guilty plea is designed to reduce his sentence, but there's no guarantee. Desertion carries with it a potential 5-year sentence, but as you mentioned, he's facing life imprisonment for the second charge. The decision rests with a military judge, Army Colonel Jeffrey Nance. The court will resume, presumably, for sentencing on Monday. Regarding the 5 prisoners released in exchange for Bergdahl, those Taliban leaders who were held at Gitmo, as far as we're able to glean today, they are still in Qatar. When Bergdahl was released in 2014, Qatar agreed to keep them under house arrest for a year. The house arrest was then extended, and as of now, there's no sign that they returned to Afghanistan. Today, Bergdahl admitted to the court that he left his post because there were issues with his command, the command of his unit. Quote, "I understand that leaving was against the law. At the time, I had no intention of causing search and recovery operations." His unit mates, as you mentioned, have argued that 6 service members who were sent to search for Bergdahl died as a result of his actions. The Pentagon denied that at the time. A judge, however, has simply ruled that the injuries sustained by a Navy SEAL and an Army National Guard sergeant would not have occurred if they had not been searching for Bergdahl. Then candidate Trump called Bergdahl a traitor, suggesting he would have been executed in a previous era. In February, a military judge ruled that the president's remarks were disturbing and disappointing, but did not constitute unlawful command influence. Shepard?
Jennifer Griffin, thanks. Ever watch House of Cards on Netflix? Well, it turns out the Russians used that show to teach the so-called internet trolls in Russia how to turn Americans against our own government. That's according to an independent Russian television station. It reports it interviewed one of those trolls who said his job was to cause unrest and discontent in the United States by posting comments about race and other divisive issues on American news websites. He said the trolls were required to watch House of Cards to help them craft their online messages. Of course, the fictional show is about an American politician who manipulates and murders his way to power. Tens of thousands of people in Northern California returning home now after wildfires ripped through their region, some finding their homes untouched, but many others seeing complete devastation. A live report from one of the hardest hit areas, next on Fox News. The governor of Puerto Rico says that he's hoping to have power restored to 95% of that U.S. territory by December the 31st, more than 2 months from now. Today, just 15% of that island has electricity, more than 3 weeks after Hurricane Maria hit. President Trump is defending the progress in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico is very tough because of the fact it's an island, but it's also tough because, as you know, it was in very poor shape before the hurricanes ever hit.
True, and now there's word a utility company in Puerto Rico is handing out drinking water from a hazardous waste site. A top Democrat in the House is asking the Department of Homeland Security to investigate and report back by next week. The Puerto Rican government reports just 64% of the island has access to safe drinking water. Officials say the storm has now killed 48 people. Wildfire alert, and this woman whose home was destroyed in the deadly Northern California wildfire says, "My parents and my dogs are alive. That's all that matters." You can see her going through the debris with her dad in the Coffee Park neighborhood of Santa Rosa, and here she's trying to salvage anything they can find. Thousands of people have been returning home to find there's nothing left, just foundations and piles of ash. California emergency management teams say strong wind gusts that plagued firefighters last week and into the weekend are finally letting up. making it easier for crews as they fight the 15 fires still burning large sections of wine country. Officials in Northern California say the out-of-control wildfires have killed at least 41 people and destroyed some 5,700 buildings. Claudia Cowan's on scene again for us today. She's live in Santa Rosa, California. Hi, Claudia.
Well, hello, Shepard. You know, so many neighborhoods like this one remain evacuated and will stay evacuated probably for at least a few more days. While utility crews work, they're going street by street to fix down power lines, house by house to check for gas leaks. It is a slow and go process, but until it's done, people will not be allowed to come back. And I can tell you it's just heartbreaking to see what is left of people's lives. Hundreds of homes here in Santa Rosa have been reduced to rubble and ash. But county officials are cautiously optimistic. They have now turned a corner.
We've got a long road ahead of us, but the day that we had hoped would come, 1 week later, we are here.
Tragically, a fatality today from the firefighting effort. A contractor driving a water tender was killed when his vehicle flipped on a steep road near Calistoga. Investigators say fatigue may have played a role. These crews have been working around the clock in grueling conditions. But some 11,000 firefighters are finally making progress out here thanks to better weather. In fact, Shepard, they say they hope to get containment on all of these fires by the end of the week, and they may get a boost from some badly needed rain. There is a chance of it later this week. Back to
Let's hope. Claudia Cowan in Santa Rosa, thanks. A packed jet dropping some 20,000 feet in mid-flight, and passengers say the reaction of the flight attendants didn't help them keep calm at all. So an airline flight plunged 24,000 feet in less than 10 minutes. The drop so intense, passengers said they thought they were going to die. They said even the crew members were screaming. This happened on this Air Asia plane headed from Perth, Australia, to the island of Bali. One woman told Sky News Australia that she texted her family to say goodbye. And a man told NBC News he promised his girlfriend on the plane or proposed to her while wearing an oxygen mask. She said yes, by the way. Passengers say they were bracing for the worst-case scenario.
Lots of people crying, lots of people pulling out the life jackets and stuff, like pretty much preparing. Like we thought there was a good chance that we were going to go down.
AirAsia reports that jet landed safely back in Australia and that engineers are inspecting it. A spokesperson for the airline blamed a technical issue, saying the safety of our guests is of utmost priority. What goes up must come down. In the case of China's space station, it's going to come down very quickly and very much out of control. A Harvard astrophysicist telling British newspaper that China's abandoned space station is going to crash into Earth in a few months, raining chunks of metal onto the planet. The problem is they don't know exactly where or precisely when. The space station weighs about 8 tons, about the size of a small bulldozer. A rep for China's space agency says most of it should burn up in the atmosphere, but that large chunks could still hit the ground. Scientists say the chances of anybody actually getting hurt are relatively small, and this has happened before. America's first space station, Skylab, crashed in 1979. Skylab fallout, anyone? Parts of it came down in Western Australia. Nobody hurt. But the Aussies did fine NASA $400 for littering. Some dogs eat homework. Other pets have more interesting diets. And some dogs eat everything. And then when something really ridiculous ends up in front of them, they eat that. Lillian has some examples. This is amazing.
Every year, Veterinary Practice News asks people to send in their craziest X-rays.
Veterinary Practice News.
Yes.
Oh, right.
And this is this year's winner, Leah. She's an English bulldog who ate a rib bone about the size of her stomach.
A rib bone?
Huge. When doctors went in to take it out, they discovered she had also eaten a toy bone. She seems to be very sorry.
I'm sure she is.
Runner-up was Lola, a tortoise who ate a symbol of herself, I guess, right there. They found that, and she's doing well.
Okay.
A honorable mention went to Gert the gator. She was left swimming in a bathtub. Owners came back and found all the water was missing and the drain was gone. Vets found the drain on her X-ray.
Oh, wow.
Some other examples, 2 spoons that were in a lab.
Who swallowed that?
That was a lab. Labrador.
A Labrador.
Yeah, I didn't get a
I was
name or
thinking
a picture.
laboratory.
Yeah, no,
a Labrador.
sorry.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Spoons.
They're all doing okay, though.
The food in them was good. Just
Yeah,
ate
peanut
whole food.
butter was on these.